are the Huns descendants of the Xiongnu?
In the web, the topic of the Huns or the Xiongnu is a commonplace, but it continues to be popular. This is because netizens love to hear about it and talk about it with great relish. The fundamental reason lies in the uncertainty of the argument. The more uncertain it is, the more room there is for development. Then, the report will have practical significance only if the tilt of the scale of yes or no is counted and expressed in numbers.
What are the Xiongnu?
The Xiongnu were once a powerful nomadic tribe in the north of ancient China. The earliest record of their activities can be traced back to the 3rd century BC. The Xiongnu played an important role in Chinese history, especially during the Qin and Han dynasties, around 2,000 years ago. The Xiongnu posed a constant threat to the border security of the Central Plains dynasties. The Xiongnu lived a nomadic life and were famous for their superb riding skills and skilled bows and arrows. They often plundered and harassed neighboring farming peoples. The Xiongnu were not a single nation, or even a single race, but a loose alliance of multiple ethnic groups, with Mongolians as the main race. On weekdays, each of them lived their own lives. Once they went south to plunder, they would respond to the call and rush forward. The most peculiar thing is that there were also a large number of Han people among the Xiongnu. The specific number of Han people can be known by looking at the scale of the Great Wall. Both the new and old Great Walls are ineffective in resisting invasions, but they are good at preventing smuggling. One of the purposes of building the Great Wall was to prevent Han people from smuggling and joining the Xiongnu, bringing their culture and technology with them. For example, the Xiongnu's iron smelting technology may have come from Han people who defected. Han Chinese smugglers were generally highly educated and were favored by the Xiongnu. Even Han Chinese captives were treated exceptionally well by the Xiongnu. For example, Jiang Qun, who was sent to the western regions, was captured by the Xiongnu twice, both of which were capital crimes. However, he was not beheaded, but was rewarded with a wife. Therefore, among the Han people, those who committed crimes or could not marry a wife might try to defect to the Xiongnu. The construction of the Great Wall was more about preventing cross-border smuggling and defection. At the height of the Xiongnu's power, they formed a powerful military alliance and ruled a vast area that included northern China, Mongolia, and parts of Central Asia. The Xiongnu posed a significant threat to the Han dynasty, prompting Emperor Wu of Han to take a series of military actions that gambled with the fate of the country. This protracted war eventually wore down the Xiongnu's vitality and forced them to split into two parts: the southern Xiongnu, who submitted to the Han dynasty, while the northern Xiongnu were forced to migrate westward and live in exile. The division and migration of the Xiongnu had a profound impact on the history of Eurasia. Some scholars believe that the westward migration of the northern Xiongnu was related to the later barbarian migration in Europe. However, the specific origin, language and relationship of the Xiongnu with other ethnic groups are still controversial topics in the academic community due to insufficient evidence. Compared with agricultural civilization, the Xiongnu level of civilization is obviously too low. They don't even have their own writing. And it is precisely because of this characteristic that they don't have their own history. The history of the Xiongnu that has been circulated in the world was compiled by foreigners. Even the enemies of the Xiongnu distortion is inevitable due to emotions. The first person to record the Xiongnu was Sima Qian, a great historian during the reign of Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty. However, Sima Qian was probably not a man of honor. In writing the academic document records of the grand historian, he did not use the term Hu people as they called themselves, but used the Han people's derogatory term Xiongnu. This made later generations, generation after generation, only know Xiongnu but not Hu people.
Can the Xiongnu defeat the Han people?
All the Xiongnu were soldiers, especially good at riding and shooting. They were absolutely invincible in the plains. They fought without worrying about logistics, because they drove livestock to fight. Each soldier had 3 horses. The first was a mount for marching. The second was used to carry baggage. The third was used to charge into battle. They ate beef, mutton, and horse meat, and drank milk, goat milk, and horse milk. They were highly mobile and better at offensive warfare. But the Xiongnu had a fatal flaw, which was that they could only attack but not defend. This was because they had no fixed place to live and did not build permanent cities. Without cities, there would be no solid walls, fortresses, trenches, or moats. Therefore, once the Han army took the initiative to attack and attacked suddenly, the Xiongnu would undoubtedly be defeated. The Xiongnu could only plunder the border villages and towns of the Han people. When they encountered city walls, they were powerless and could only sigh at the city because they lacked siege equipment. The Xiongnu plundered the frontier villages of the Han people in autumn. Because the horses had eaten tender grass all summer, they were fat and strong in autumn. But after winter, the situation was reversed. The horses had been hungry all winter and became skinny. In spring, the situation was even worse. The livestock were in heat, and the pregnant females were not convenient for strenuous exercise. The same was true for people. Women were pregnant and their bellies were bulging, making it very inconvenient to move. As the saying goes, attack while you are sick. The Han army was dispatched at this time to raid the Xiongnu. At this time, even if the Xiongnu were prepared, they had to divide their troops and use most of them to protect pregnant women, families, and livestock. If the war continued for a long time, the Xiongnu would definitely be the ones who could not hold out. The great generals Wei Qing and Huo Qubing in the Western Han dynasty became military gods in this way. Similarly, in the Eastern Han dynasty, the great rogue general Dou eventually drove the Xiongnu into exile. The Xiongnu completely disappeared from the sight of the Han people. This marked the complete defeat of the Xiongnu and the complete victory of the Han people in this protracted war between the Han and the Xiongnu. The fact that the Han people built the Qin Great Wall and the Ming Great Wall does not mean that they were afraid of the northern nomadic peoples. On the contrary, the Han army attacked the northern grasslands several times, and returned home in triumph after victory, without being greedy for an inch of land in the north. The subjects of the Han dynasty welcomed the royal army with food and drink. This is because the annual precipitation in the northern territory is less than 400 millimeters. In this environment, only grazing is allowed, and crops cannot be grown. For the farming people, it is equivalent to a barren land where no bird shit. So the Han people built the Great Wall along this precipitation line. As for the new Great Wall moving southward than the old Great Wall, it is because this precipitation line has moved southward. Therefore, the existence of the Great Wall is the exclusion and humiliation of the nomadic peoples by the farming people. Because of its existence, it divides the geographical boundary between civilization and ignorance.
What are the Huns?
The Huns were a nomadic tribe active from the 4th to the 6th century AD. They were composed of many ethnic groups and their footprints were all over Eastern Europe, Central Asia and the Caucasus. The Huns were famous for their powerful cavalry and fierce fighting power, and they once caused great harm to the Eastern and Western Roman empires. The origin of the Huns has always been a focus of debate among historians. The current mainstream view is that the Huns originated from the grassland area on the east bank of the Volga River and had a certain origin with other nomadic peoples, such as the Huns and the Turks. Through continuous migration and conquest, the Huns gradually formed a powerful nomadic empire. The Huns mainly lived on nomadism. They raised cattle, sheep, horses and other livestock, and constantly migrated to find pastures with abundant grass and water. The social organization of the Huns was relatively loose, consisting of multiple tribes. The Huns' cavalry was the cornerstone of their powerful military force. They were highly mobile, good at riding and shooting, and often attacked the enemy unexpectedly. It was with the powerful cavalry that the Huns were able to conquer a large area of land in a short period of time. The glory of the Hun Empire was only a flash in the pan and did not last long. After the death of the devil leader Attila, the Hun Empire immediately collapsed, and fierce infighting broke out among the tribes. In the end, the Huns were diluted and assimilated by other ethnic groups and gradually disappeared from the stage of history.
Huns and the Scourge of God.
The label Scourge of God vividly describes the great influence of the Huns during Attila's time on European history. Strong military force, sweeping across the European continent, the Hun cavalry was brave and good at fighting, with flexible tactics, posing a huge threat to European countries at the time. The Hun Empire under Attila's leadership launched large-scale military sweeps many times, sweeping almost the entire Europe, and the Roman Empire, the Ostrogothic kingdom, etc., were all severely damaged. It brought a huge impact to Europe. The invasion of the Huns accelerated the decline of the Western Roman Empire, promoted the great migration of the Germanic people, and had a profound impact on the political, economic and cultural structure of Europe. The title of God's whip has a strong religious color. Medieval Europeans believed that the invasion of the Huns was God's punishment on the Roman Empire and a tool used by God to whip the world.
Similarities between the Huns and the Xiongnu.
Although the Huns and the Xiongnu belong to two completely different groups, they do have some similarities. For example, both are nomadic peoples, living mainly in grassland areas. Both have similar living customs. For example, worshipping the sun and the moon, worshipping heaven and earth, drinking blood to form alliances, etc. Both have some similarities in cultural heritage, such as respect for ancestors and mourning customs. People's surnames come first, and their given names come last. The similarities between the Huns and the Xiongnu are also reflected in many aspects, including origin, lifestyle, military characteristics, etc. These similarities have led some historians to speculate that the Huns may be descendants of the Xiongnu, or that the Huns and the Xiongnu have certain ethnic connections. They both make their livings as nomads and are good at riding and archery. Their social organization is very loose, but they are highly mobile and adapted to the living environment of the grassland. They are both known for their powerful cavalry units. Military tactics usually include rapid cavalry raids, encirclements, and harassment, using mobility and high speed to defeat opponents. This tactic posed a strong advantage to the Central Plains, which was dominated by infantry at the time, and the agricultural ethnic armies in Europe. The Xiongnu posed a long-term threat to the northern border of the Han dynasty, forcing the Han dynasty to defend and counterattack. For example, building the Great Wall, setting up frontier military towns, and military facilities such as the Qinzi Road. The rampage of the Huns in Europe directly threatened the security of the Western Roman Empire and accelerated the decline of the Western Roman Empire. Both the Huns and the Xiongnu are described as brutal and aggressive peoples in historical documents. This negative image, to a certain extent, reflects their conflict with settled agricultural civilization, but also shows their strong influence on the surrounding areas. The ethnic composition of the Xiongnu and the Huns is very complex. During their expansion and migration, they absorbed many other ethnic groups or tribes and formed a diversified group. This mixture enabled them to quickly adapt to different geographical environments and social conditions. The existence of the Xiongnu promoted the evolution of the military and diplomatic strategies of the Han dynasty. The activities of the Huns in Europe profoundly affected the Great Migration of the Germanic peoples and the historical process of Western Europe.
Differences between Huns and Xiongnu.
Huns and Xiongnu. Hundreds of years after the Xiongnu disappeared from the sight of the Han people, the production technology and civilization level of the Xiongnu were far behind those of the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu had mastered the iron smelting technology, and the bows and arrows they made had widely used iron arrowheads. However, the Xiongnu were still using animal bone arrowheads. The advantage of iron arrowheads was that they were stable, accurate, and fierce. That is, they flew farther, hit more accurately, and were more suitable for large-scale, workshop-based, and mass production. Although both the Xiongnu and the Xiongnu were nomadic peoples, the Xiongnu lived by following water and grass, and had no fixed place to live. But the Xiongnu preferred to live a settled life. The habits of the two were completely different. There are significant differences between the Huns and the Xiongnu in terms of culture and customs. This is mainly due to the fact that they developed in different regions and historical backgrounds and influenced each other with the civilizations they came into contact with. The Xiongnu were nomadic people on the grasslands in northern China, active from the 3rd century BC to around the 1st century AD. They mainly operated in East Asia and Central Asia, and had frequent conflicts and exchanges with the Central Plains dynasty of the Han dynasty. The Xiongnu appeared in the late 4th century to the 5th century AD, and their activities were concentrated in Europe. They came from the steppes of East Europe and gradually expanded westward into the territory of the Roman Empire. The language of the Xiongnu is still controversial, but it is generally believed to be related to Turkic, Mongolian, or Tungusic. The Xiongnu's religious beliefs are mainly shamanism, worshipping nature and ancestors, and performing rituals of offering sacrifices to heaven and ancestors. The Xiongnu society is based on tribes, and implements the ruling form of clans and tribal alliances. The Xiongnu Shanyu is the supreme ruler, with many tribal leaders under him. The language of the Huns is not completely clear yet, and it may be an independent language related to the Turkic language family or other Central Asian languages. After the Huns invaded Europe, they had some conflicts with Christian culture, but their own religious beliefs were mostly polytheistic, worshipping war gods. The Huns had a strong military organization, and tribal leaders such as Attila had a high degree of power concentration. The Huns were mainly nomadic, relying on animal husbandry, hunting and trade with the Han people. Their lifestyle was closely related to the grassland environment, and they focused on riding and archery. The Huns were good at using light cavalry tactics, and bows and arrows were their main weapons. They often raided the enemy with fast and flexible cavalry tactics. The Huns had a long-term hostile relationship with the Han people, but they also had peaceful exchanges such as marriage and trade. The existence of the Huns had a profound impact on the border policy and military strategy of the Han dynasty. The appearance of the Huns in Europe was considered part of the Great Migration of Nations and played an important role in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. They had complex war and alliance relationships with the Roman Empire, Goths and other nations. Xiongnu culture had a profound impact on Chinese history, including the military defense of the Han dynasty, such as the Great Wall, and ethnic policies. The image of the Xiongnu was portrayed as a representative of northern nomadic peoples in Chinese literature and history books. The influence of the Huns in Europe was mainly reflected in the impact on the Roman Empire. They were regarded as barbarians and were especially famous for Attila's conquest. They had an indirect impact on the formation of the European Middle Ages and the Great Integration of Nations. Although the Huns and the Xiongnu have a certain origin relationship, they are significantly different in geographical environment, cultural background, social development and interaction with external civilizations. And the differences are far greater than the similarities.
Genetic evidence.
Genetic evidence. There are only a handful of ancient tombs of Huns and Xiongnu that have been excavated, and DNA comparison shows only a little overlap. Unfortunately, this pitiful overlap cannot prove who came first and who came later. Even if the exiled Huns were wiped out by bad weather or a rampant plague, it is not impossible. Even if there is a DNA overlap, it can only be said that the ancestors of some Huns and Xiongnu were once brothers from the same mother. It cannot be said that all Huns are descendants of Xiongnu. If the argument is generalized, it will make a metaphysical philosophical error. After the northern Huns were driven northward by the rogue general Docian of the eastern Han dynasty and eventually became exiles, the possibility of their annihilation should be greater than the Arabian Nights' fantasy of their transformation into Huns. Because the goose leaves its voice behind, and the man leaves his name behind. The Huns brought their livestock and tents and migrated westward in a mighty and grand manner. Even if the Huns themselves did not record such a big movement, did the Han people among the Huns and other ethnic groups passing by also have no records? Since there are absolutely no records, there is only one convincing argument, that is, during the Huns' great wandering in the wilderness, at least the majority were killed by natural disasters, such as extreme cold or plague, and the survivors completely lost their faith and integrated into other ethnic groups. Some studies have found that some Han individuals have the same type as Xiongnu people, such as Q1A2, through the analysis of the Y chromosome and haplogroup of ancient Xiongnu corpses. This shows that there is a certain genetic connection between the two, indicating that some people between the two have a common ancestor or have had ethnic fusion. But it is not enough to prove that the Huns are descendants of Xiongnu. As mentioned earlier, the Xiongnu was a loose alliance of multiple ethnic groups that clung to each other for warmth. Apart from going south to plunder the Han people, they were probably always sleeping in the same bed but dreaming different dreams, seemingly in harmony but actually indifferent, and even fighting openly and secretly and not intermarrying with each other. Then, it is unlikely that they have common genes.
Scholars' attitude.
20 years ago, it was generally believed in academia that the Huns were the Xiongnu. But after that, due to more in-depth research, the trend took a sharp turn and was completely denied. The two most active grassroots history teachers in China, Ji Lianhai and Yuan Tengfei, both experienced this embarrassing turn. For example, Yuan Tengfei denied it not long after he said the Huns were the Xiongnu and called himself idiot. This excessive self-deprecation is not desirable, but it is clearly revealed in terms of academic attitude. The famous professors Li Bo and Meng Man, who are active in the media, have studied and discussed this issue. Professor Li Bo believes that although there are certain similarities between the Huns and the Xiongnu in terms of culture, customs, military and social structure, there are great differences in language and physical characteristics. Therefore, it is not appropriate to easily regard the Xiongnu and the Huns as the same ethnic group. Professor Meng Man believes that the Huns may have originated in Central Asia or even in the grasslands further east. After the northern Huns migrated westward, the various ethnic groups influenced by them may have gradually spread their customs, tactics, and social organization forms westward, eventually affecting the Huns. In summary, if the articles and videos that fully support the Huns are the Huns were published 10 or 20 years ago, then it would be excusable. But if it appeared after that, then it would be a bit inappropriate.
Are the Huns descendants of the Xiongnu?
Although both the Huns and the Xiongnu were nomadic peoples, they belonged to different populations after all. The Xiongnu were mainly active in northern China. The Huns were active in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The historical period of the Xiongnu was earlier than that of the Huns. There were obvious differences in time and space between the two. The earliest person to propose the view that the Huns are the Xiongnu can be traced back to the 18th century, the French Orientalist Joseph de Guinier. This theory holds that after the great escape of the northern Huns, they continued to migrate westward, gradually became the Huns, and appeared in Europe. They conquered cities and territories along the way, and made Europe a mess. Out of emotion, the Chinese seem to enjoy talking about this and are happy to see it happen. The reason is the sense of national superiority, since the Huns were defeated by the Han people, and Europe was defeated by the Huns. So, if the Huns are the Huns, doesn't it prove that Europe is the defeated of the defeated by the Han people? The core point of the argument that the Huns are descendants of the Xiongnu is that both of them contain the word Hun. However, it is precisely this absurdity that makes the argument laughable. Because these two names are derogatory and malicious derogatory names given by others. The word Xiongnu is a derogatory name used by the Han people to refer to the northern nomadic people. The Xiongnu people call themselves Hu people. For example, the idioms Hu clothing and riding and shooting, Hu horses in the north wind, and the poem But if the flying general of Longcheng is here, the Hu horses will not be allowed to cross the ancient mountains. The word Hu in them all refers to the Xiongnu people. The word Zhongren is a derogatory name used by the Romans to refer to the Huns. The Romans called the Huns Hun. In the Latin context, this word has the meaning of barbarian and barbarian tribe. The Huns did not call themselves Huns and spread them to the world. Academically, for convenience, many people prefer to call the Hun group Attila's Empire. Chinese people have many derogatory names for foreigners. For example, Fan, Yidi, Rong, Guizi, Woko. If derogatory and malicious derogatory names can also be honored in the elegant hall and used to make a fuss, then the little Japanese devils invading China should be expressed like this: We are hateful little Japanese devils. We, the Japanese pirates, came to China, burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of evil, with the purpose of establishing Sino-Japanese friendship. We, a small foreign country, hope to gain full understanding and cooperation from you, the Celestial Empire, and jointly build the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere that we, the little devils, are driven and enslaved. Isn't such rhetoric very funny? In fact, calling the Huns is just because they are all descendants of the Hun generation, which is equally funny. In historical research, the argument that the Hun people in Europe and the Xiongnu people in China have a hereditary relationship has existed for a long time, but no solid evidence has been found. However, the view that the Ximing Huns are not descendants of the Huns, although logically more reasonable, also lacks evidence. Geographical distance is an important factor. The Huns originally lived in northern China and the Middle East today. The Huns appeared in today's Yelik and western Russia and France. From a geographical point of view, the Huns spanned Central Asia and North Asia. The Huns were more inclined to the west. If the Huns were descendants of the Huns, then they must have clear historical traces and cultural migration records to achieve such a huge movement. However, there is currently no evidence to support this argument. In terms of linguistics, there are also obvious differences between the language systems of the Huns and the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu language should belong to the ancient Longyan language family, while the Xiongnu language is closer to the ancient Landin language family or the ancient Sei language family. The language systems of the two are completely different and strangers. The optimization and migration of languages should be seen in historical documents and the records of other ethnic groups of the same period. But there is currently no evidence to prove that the Huns and the Xiongnu have obvious similarities and inheritance relationships in language. The Huns and the Xiongnu have obvious differences in culture, language, geography, and historical tracking, and they cannot be connected at all. Therefore, the Huns at least cannot be the direct descendants of the Xiongnu. From various academic and archaeological evidence, there is indeed a little bit of connection between the Huns and the Xiongnu. But it is definitely not enough to prove that the Huns are the Xiongnu. If this logic must be expressed in numbers, then the argument that the Huns are not the Xiongnu accounts for more than 99%.